It begins quietly, always quietly, not with a scream or a crash, but with the slow collapse of something sacred. You're small, maybe 6, maybe 7, and you already understand things no one explained. You watch the people who are supposed to protect you lose control of their own lives. Maybe they yell, maybe they drink, maybe they vanish into the glow of a television, eyes hollow and spirit gone, and something ancient inside you clicks. If I don't hold it together, no one will. That's the day childhood ends. Not on paper, not in years, but in silence. You start to perform. You become the quiet one, the reliable one, the tiny peacekeeper with the tired eyes. You read every room like it's a survival map. Every sigh, every shift in tone, every slammed door becomes a weather report for your nervous system. And people call you mature. They say you're wise beyond your years. They clap for your composure, never realizing it's built on fear. But what no one tells you is this: a child who learns to survive like that never really learns to live. The mind adapts fast. Children are like wet cement. Every impression leaves a mark. When you're forced to carry the emotional weight of adults, the brain rewires itself for vigilance. Like a T learns to scan for danger before it learns to dream. Psychologists call it parentification, but that word is too clean, too clinical. What it really means is you became the parent before you ever got to be the child. You learned to soothe others before anyone soothed you. You became fluent in the language of emotional emergencies. And over time, that fluency became your identity. People start saying things like, "You're so strong. You're so independent. You're always there for everyone." They mean it as praise. You hear it as a sentence. Because strength became your currency. And underneath that armor, a small voice whispers, "When do I get to rest?" This is the paradox of the prematurely grown. They appear put together, yet they're held together by fear. They function in chaos, but collapse in peace. They crave love, but don't know what to do when it arrives. You see it in the way they work, overachieving to the point of exhaustion. You see it in the way they love, giving everything, asking for nothing. You see it in the way they smile, that tight, polite curve that hides more than it shows. They don't ask for help because they were trained to believe help never comes. They don't cry because it once made things worse. They don't rest because rest feels unsafe. To the outside world, they look capable. Inside, they're exhausted. Here's the brutal truth: a child who grows up too fast never actually grows up. They just learn how to impersonate an adult. They learn how to look responsible while secretly waiting for someone to notice the pain they never named. They live in a constant state of emotional debt, always owing, never receiving. And the body remembers. Even decades later, the nervous system still hums at the same frequency. It flinches at kindness. It tenses in silence. It confuses safety with boredom and chaos with home. You can see it in the way they fidget when things are finally calm. Their body says this stillness is suspicious. Something bad must be coming. That's what happens when your early environment trains you to survive instead of exist. Let's go deeper. The human brain develops in the presence of co-regulation. That means when you're young, you learn how to manage your emotions by borrowing someone else's calm. You cry, and a parent soothes you. You get scared, and someone tells you it's safe now. That's how stability is wired into the nervous system. But when that process is disrupted, when the parent is the one who's scared, angry, drunk, depressed, or unpredictable, the child adapts. They reverse the flow. Instead of receiving calm, they generate it. They become the regulator. They parent the parent. That's not a small adjustment. That's a complete rewiring of human development. It turns empathy into hypervigilance. It turns kindness into strategy. It turns care into control. Because if you can predict everyone's moods, you can prevent disaster. And that illusion of control becomes your only source of safety. Fast forward 20 years. You're in your 20s, maybe 30s, and life looks functional on the surface. You're working, loving, producing, achieving. But deep down, something's off. You can't rest without guilt. You overthink every silence. You panic when someone withdraws affection. Not because you're needy, but because your nervous system remembers what withdrawal used to mean. danger. You're always braced for loss. Even happiness feels temporary, like standing on thin ice. And when peace finally finds you, you almost sabotage it because part of you still believes calm is the prelude to chaos. That's the residue of a stolen childhood. But let's not drown in the sadness. Let's dissect it, because understanding is the first taste of freedom. Think of your childhood self as an actor cast in a role far beyond their age. They learned to manage scenes they should never have been in. They carried scripts written by adults who didn't know their lines. The performance was convincing. So convincing that you forgot it was an act. Now, as an adult, you're still playing that role, the responsible one, the caretaker, the unshakable. You meet someone new, and instantly, your instincts ask, what do they need from me? You offer comfort before they even ask. You manage their emotions so well that you forget to check your own. That's not kindness. That's conditioning. You're addicted to being needed because it's the only way you've ever felt valuable. But that addiction costs you everything: rest, vulnerability, even authenticity. There's a haunting phrase in psychology: children adapt to survive, adults repeat to cope. That's the loop most never see. What saved you as a child now strangles you as an adult. You learn that love must be earned. So you work yourself to exhaustion trying to prove you're enough. You learn that expressing need brings chaos. So you stay silent, even when your chest aches to be understood. You learn that safety is something you create, not receive. So you micromanage life, relationships, even emotions, anything to avoid helplessness. You mistake exhaustion for peace. You confuse being wanted with being useful. You think being loved means being perfect. This is not your fault. It's an inheritance. Let's pause and look at the philosophy under all this. Human beings are storytelling creatures. We survive by creating meaning. When a child faces pain without explanation, they build a story to make sense of it. A parent screams. The child thinks, I must have done something wrong. A parent leaves. The child concludes, I wasn't worth staying for. That story becomes the foundation of the self. And even when the circumstances change, the story remains. So years later, when someone loves you, that old narrative still whispers, this won't last. I'll ruin it. They'll leave. You can change jobs, partners, cities, but until you rewrite the story, the same pattern follows. Because trauma doesn't just wound, it narrates. Here's where philosophy meets psychology. Think of your mind as a myth-making machine. Every childhood wound becomes a god or demon that rules your inner world. Fear becomes the god of control. Guilt becomes the god of silence. Responsibility becomes the god of worth. You build temples to them in your habits, your relationships, your ambitions. You pray to them every time you say, I'm fine, when you're not. And every time someone offers help and you say, no, I got it, you're still worshiping at the altar of self-reliance that once kept you alive. But gods lose power when you stop worshiping. The moment you begin to see the pattern, the illusion cracks. Awareness is rebellion. Now let's talk about emotion, the hidden gravity of the soul. When you suppress grief long enough, it doesn't disappear, it solidifies. It turns into perfectionism, anxiety, and emotional detachment. You don't cry, but your body does through tension, fatigue, insomnia. You don't scream, but your relationships do through misunderstandings, distance, exhaustion. Because the body keeps trying to complete the emotional cycle you were never allowed to finish. You were taught to be strong, but strength, misused, becomes armor. And here's the danger of armor. It protects, but it also isolates. You become untouchable. Not because you want to be, but because touch means risk. Love means surrender. And surrender once meant pain. Most adults think they've outgrown their childhood. But you can't outgrow what lives in your nervous system. You have to meet it. That's where shadow work begins. Not in crystals or affirmations, but in courage. The courage to look at the child you once were and say, I see you. I know why you did what you did. You don't have to do it anymore. That's where the healing starts. Not in fixing, but in witnessing. Because for a child who grew up too fast, the greatest wound was invisibility. And '01 noticed their pain. And '01 validated their fear. And '01 said, "You were just a kid." So healing isn't about rewriting the past. It's about giving that child what they never got: acknowledgement. And here's the most heartbreaking realization: you were never broken. You were adapted. You were a genius of survival. You built an entire identity around keeping others safe because that's what love demanded. You became an artist of composure, a master of reading emotions, a builder of stability in unstable homes. But adaptation has a cost. You forgot how to need. You forgot how to receive. You forgot how to be small, messy, and human. You learned how to survive storms, but not how to enjoy calm weather. That's where we'll pause for now, at the edge between awareness and transformation. Because what comes next is the unraveling, how these survival patterns echo into adulthood: love, career, self-worth, and identity. And more importantly, how to break the loop without breaking yourself. You grow up, but the child stays. They hide under the layers of competence, buried beneath your calm voice and steady work ethic. They don't disappear, they simply wait. And every time you feel inexplicable sadness or anxiety, that's them knocking. Are we safe now, they ask. Most people don't answer. They just turn up the noise. Work more, scroll more, achieve more. Anything to drown the echo of that forgotten voice. But the truth is, your adult life is a dialogue with your childhood, whether you admit it or not. Let's talk about how the past sneaks into the present. In relationships, you become the fixer. You fall in love with potential instead of reality. You're drawn to broken people, not because you like chaos, but because brokenness feels familiar. You try to earn love by healing others, but that's just the child in you trying to heal their parent. You confuse intensity with intimacy. You mistake care for control. And when someone finally offers genuine love, you don't trust it. You wait for the punchline, for the rejection, for the shift in tone that means you were right all along. Love is conditional. You replay the same emotional scripts again and again. Not because you want to suffer, but because repetition feels safer than uncertainty. That's how the psyche works. It seeks the familiar, even if the familiar hurts. In your career, the same pattern shows up wearing a different mask. You're the one everyone depends on, the overperformer, the one who takes on too much, smiles through burnout, and apologizes for needing rest. You think productivity equals worth. You think if you stop achieving, you'll vanish. Because as a child, being useful was how you earned love. Now, being busy is how you earn existence. You don't celebrate success. You brace for the next demand. Compliments make you uncomfortable. Rest feels like guilt. That's not ambition. That's survival. You're still trying to prove you're right to be here. And when it comes to the self, the private, unspoken you, the consequences run deepest. You have trouble identifying what you actually feel. When someone asks, "How are you?" your mind blanks. You default to "I'm fine," because that answer once kept you safe. But fine isn't a feeling. It's a defense. Your body learned that expressing emotion is risky, so it numbed you to survive. And that numbness becomes the cage of adulthood. You crave connection, but fear vulnerability. You want peace, but can't tolerate calm. You long for freedom, but cling to control. Every contradiction is a wound trying to make sense of itself. Now, let's talk about why this happens. When a child is forced into the role of caretaker, the nervous system skips developmental stages. You never learned emotional safety. You learned emotional management. You never learned trust. You learned predictability. You never learned rest. You learned readiness. That's the blueprint your body still follows. You can't just think your way out of it because the trauma isn't in your thoughts, it's in your physiology. That's why you flinch when someone raises their voice. That's why silence feels unbearable. That's why you plan every detail, because unpredictability used to mean pain. Your body doesn't care that you're 30 years old. It only knows that safety was once a myth. But there's another side to this, a forgotten strength. Because the same sensitivity that once kept you alive can also make you extraordinary. You read people well. You sense tension before anyone else does. You can diffuse chaos like second nature. That's emotional intelligence born from necessity. The tragedy isn't that you became too empathetic. It's that you never learned to turn that empathy inward. You extend compassion to everyone but yourself. You soothe others while silencing your own pain. You forgive the world and punish your own heart. But empathy without boundaries is self-betrayal. Love without reciprocity is self-abandonment. And peace built on suppression always collapses. Healing begins when you break the performance. That starts small, almost invisibly. You stop pretending you're okay. You admit when you're tired. You say no without an essay of apologies. You learn to disappoint people to stay true to yourself. And yes, it feels wrong at first, because guilt is the ghost of your old identity. But that discomfort is not danger. It's the feeling of freedom returning to your body. Healing isn't a grand awakening. It's a series of small rebellions. Choosing silence over explanation. Choosing rest over proving. Choosing softness over control. It's learning that strength was never about holding it together. It's about knowing when to let go. You can't reparent your past, but you can become the parent your inner child needed. You can give yourself patience, validation, and unconditional presence. You can tell that scared little version of you, you're safe now. You don't have to earn love anymore. That's not self-help talk. That's neuroscience. Because safety rewires the brain. What was once survival can become serenity, but only through repetition. Still, healing isn't linear. Sometimes it feels like progress, other times like falling apart. You'll have days when you cry without knowing why. Days when you feel like a fraud for being too emotional. Days when peace feels like boredom. But that's the nervous system recalibrating. You're teaching your body a new story. One where stillness doesn't mean danger and rest doesn't mean weakness. Every tear you let fall now is one you weren't allowed to cry then. Every boundary you set now is a message to your younger self. We matter too. Let's step back for a moment, widen the lens. Philosophically, growing up too fast is not just a personal tragedy. It's a societal one. We live in cultures that romanticize resilience and worship productivity. We hand out praise for endurance and call it virtue. We call children mature for their age without asking what forced them to be. We teach people to hide pain behind professionalism, to trade authenticity for approval, to measure worth by output. And then we wonder why entire generations are burned out, anxious, and emotionally disconnected. We are, in many ways, a civilization of overgrown children still trying to earn love through achievement. But philosophy offers a counterpoint. In ancient Greece, the concept of paideia, the full development of a person, included emotional education. To be human wasn't to perform, it was to become, to think, to feel, to know oneself deeply. Modern life stripped that away. Now we grow up externally, careers, bills, metrics, but remain stunted internally. Reclaiming that inner growth means returning to what was lost. It's not regression, it's restoration. The goal isn't to become a new person. It's to remember the one you were before fear rewired you. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's the essence of this entire journey. When you were young, you built unconscious rules for survival. Now those rules govern your adult life, disguised as personality. Shadow work means dragging those rules into the light and asking, do I still need this? Do I still need to please everyone to stay safe? Do I still need to fix others to feel loved? Do I still need to hide pain to deserve peace? When the answer becomes no, the chains loosen. But let's not romanticize it. This process hurts. It means grieving the childhood you never had. It means mourning the innocence you traded for safety. It means forgiving people who may never apologize. You'll cry for the birthdays that never felt like celebrations. You'll rage at the unfairness of having to grow up before your time. And then, when the grief finally softens, you'll feel something new, spaciousness, the space to choose. For the first time, you'll realize adulthood doesn't have to mean endless performance. You can build a life that doesn't revolve around other people's chaos. You can let love in without translating it into obligation. That's when healing becomes real. Let's make this practical. Here's what transformation looks like in motion. You start noticing triggers, not judging them, just observing. Someone cancels plans, and instead of spiraling, you breathe. Someone gets angry, and you remind yourself, that's theirs, not mine. Someone offers help, and you fight the instinct to say no. You say yes, awkwardly, but sincerely. These are small acts of rebellion against your old conditioning. And each time you choose differently, your brain rewires. Neurons that once fired for fear begin firing for trust. That's neuroplasticity, the science of healing in real time. Every act of softness is a revolution. But healing isn't about becoming endlessly peaceful. It's about becoming whole. That means integrating your anger, your sadness, your longing. Because those emotions aren't flaws, they're evidence of aliveness. They're messages from the parts of you that were once silenced. When you feel grief, it's not regression. It's remembrance. When you feel anger, it's not failure. It's boundaries being born. When you feel joy and it scares you, that's your nervous system learning safety again. Wholeness isn't perfection. It's permission. Now we arrive at the heart of the matter. The child who grew up too fast doesn't need fixing. They need freedom. Freedom to rest. Freedom to feel. Freedom to not be the strong one all the time. Because the opposite of trauma isn't strength, it's safety. And safety allows softness. The real miracle isn't surviving your childhood. It's daring to live beyond it. You don't need to keep proving your worth. You were born worthy. You don't need to keep performing love. You are love in its rawest, most human form. Here's something paradoxical. When you finally let yourself be seen, messy, imperfect, real, the people who truly love you don't run. They exhale, because authenticity is magnetic. It draws in what pretense never could. And slowly, the world around you changes. Not because it's less cruel, but because you're no longer negotiating your existence. You stop chasing peace and start embodying it. You stop rescuing others and start respecting yourself. You stop fearing the quiet and start listening to it. In that silence, you hear the child's voice again. Not scared this time, but relieved. Thank you, they whisper, for finally coming back for me. That's the full circle. Not triumph, not perfection, return. You return to the self that existed before survival took over. You return to curiosity, play, wonder, the original states of being human. You start laughing again, not because life is easy, but because you finally feel safe enough to enjoy it. You start trusting again, not because people are flawless, but because you've built inner safety that doesn't depend on them. You start living again, not just performing existence. That's what it means to truly grow up. Not fast, not forced, but fully. And here's where it loops, because this story never really ends. The child you were still walks beside the adult you've become. Some days they'll tug at your sleeve, asking for reassurance. Other days they'll dance freely, grateful to be seen. Your job isn't to silence them. It's to stay in conversation. Every time you choose truth over performance, love over control, presence over pretense, you're rewriting the story. You're proving that what began in survival can end in freedom. And maybe, just maybe, someone else watching you will realize their own story can change too. That's how healing spreads, quietly like it began. One child at a time, finding their way back home.